Okay, welcome to lesson 6 and 7 on our unit on World War Two. Now, in today's lesson, we're going to be looking at quite an important figure from the Second World War. But she wasn't a soldier, she wasn't a politician, she wasn't a leader, she was just a child. But Anne Frank has become almost the face of one of the darkest points of the Second World War. Now, before we get on to that, we're just going to have a little look at what we looked at in the last lesson. In the last lesson, we looked at the Battle of Britain and how the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, were defeated by the British RAF. Then we looked at the start of the Blitz, and then we looked at the home front and propaganda, and eventually the children's evacuation from the cities that were being bombed by the Germans. Now, in Britain, because we essentially weren't invaded by the Germans, we never were actually occupied. The German army never came in and took control. However, in large parts of Europe, they did. And so today we're actually going to look at Nazi occupation. Now, when we say occupation, it essentially means taking control, and it means taking control with a military force, with an army. So, from 1939 onwards, the Nazis had taken control of many countries across Europe. The German army left a small army in each of the countries to make sure the people did what they were told. This is called occupation. An occupation of a country means keeping control of a country with a military force. So in every country that the Germans invaded, they'd essentially leave a small army there to kind of like make sure the people did what they were told. Now, if you look at this map, you can actually see the huge area that the Germans actually occupied, they had control of. So the swastika in the middle, that's where Germany is. But actually from 1939 to 1940, the Germans actually took control and occupied Poland, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, France, and they also took control of Greece. Now, in many of these countries, the Germans left an army, and they left an army in charge. Now, how they kept control was through various means. So to keep control of the countries, the Germans used soldiers and tanks. They also took over the police force and arrested and killed anyone that tried to resist them. In many countries, they even installed something called puppet governments, made up of people who supported the Nazis. One of these were the French Vichy government, which were a French group put in charge of running France while it was occupied. It would be the equivalent of a country coming in, say, to our country, removing Boris Johnson, removing whoever the leader is at the time, and replacing them with someone that really, really, really likes that country. Someone that essentially they have complete control of, like a puppet. Now, they did this in every single country that they occupied. Some of the countries were more willing to kind of like go with the flow as much as possible, while other countries fought them to the end. But essentially, they tried the same thing. They would come in, they'd remove the police, they'd put the army in charge, they'd put their own government in charge, essentially just trying to control the people. Now, why they wanted to control the people was for different means. Remember, the Nazis wanted living space. They thought that they wanted to build a greater Germany. So they wanted to use Europe to build farms, and they wanted to use factories to help the Nazi war effort. So in all the countries that they took over the factories, they took over the farms, they took over the people, essentially. And in many, they actually started building war factories to carry on the war effort. A big example of this would be France, where they built airfields and submarine bases or U-boat pens to help fight them against the British. In fact, many of the German submarines that were sinking British ships came from France. Many of the big battleships that the Germans built came from Norway. Many of the guns and defences that the Germans put in place were built in France. This is what they did with the countries they had taken over. Now, if you were living in one of those countries, it was a pretty dark time. The army, a foreign army are in charge. The government, they're telling you, oh no, everything's okay. You know they've been put there by the invading army. The police are controlled by the army. You've got really, really strict rules. If you say anything against the Germans or the Nazis, you're going to be arrested or killed. It's quite a dark time. And this is where we come to talking about Anne Frank. Now, Anne Frank was only a child. She was only a child when the war started. And sadly, by looking at the date she died as a child. Now, you might have heard of Anne Frank. Anne Frank is quite a famous figure. But what we're going to do in today's lesson, we're going to talk a little bit more about Anne Frank. So, Nazi occupation, life under the Nazis. Living in countries occupied by the German army was, for many, a terrifying experience. Like in Germany before the war, the Nazis began persecuting and arresting minority groups, especially Jewish people. Remember how the Nazis had done this in their own country. They'd actually started arresting and persecuting Jews and minority groups and put them into work camps, as they called them. Now, using their secret police, the Gestapo, Jews and anyone found helping them were arrested and taken to concentration camps. Now, this term concentration camps will come up more often as we go through this. Essentially, as we know now, a concentration camp was essentially a death camp. At the time, the people didn't know there were death camps. There were rumours coming out that everybody being taken to these concentration camps were being killed by the Nazis. But for many at the time, they assumed it was kind of like a prison. They didn't realise actually how bad it was. For much of the war, nobody knew that was happening to the people arrested by the Gestapo and sent to the concentration camps. Many were never seen again. So, born on 12th June 1929, Anne Frank was a young teenager in the Netherlands during World War II. In fact, Anne Frank was actually born in Germany, but her and her family had escaped Germany when Anne was still a very, very small child, and they'd come to the Netherlands and resettled there in an effort to escape the Nazis. So she lived in Amsterdam with her family, but in 1942, Anne and her family were forced to go into hiding from the Nazis, who wanted to get rid of Europe's Jewish population. The Nazis invaded the Netherlands in 1940, so that she actually had to live under Nazi rule for 2 years. Now, the Nazis, when they moved into countries, they were incredibly cruel to anybody that was Jewish. They'd make them wear yellow stars on all of their clothes, so they could be identified. Again, just to be cruel, really. They banned them from having their own businesses and shops. They banned them from going to certain buildings and hospitals and schools. They banned them from going to parks. Essentially, they tried to make them into second-class citizens. But in 1942, her and her family, they actually went into hiding, and they took a business that her father had owned, and they made an annex, kind of like a secret apartment above the business. So hiding in a secret annex above her father's shop, and her family hid from the Nazis for 3 years. So her and her family, and in fact another family, went into this annex, and with the help of friends and family who weren't being kind of hunted by the Nazis, they were able to hide behind, in a secret compartment behind, a bookshelf. And they were able to stay there for 3 years. Now, Anne always dreamed of becoming a world-famous writer. And during her time in hiding, she wrote a diary about her experiences. She called her diary Kitty. She dreamed that one day she might use her diary to write a book. However, Anne never saw her book published. After being discovered by the Nazis in 1944, Anne and her family were arrested and sent to a Nazi concentration camp. The camp conditions were despicably evil, and sadly in January 1945, Anne and her sister, Margot, died at the camp from illness. Along with almost 6 million Jews and 11 million other minority groups, Anne was the victim of the Holocaust. Now, the Holocaust, as I said, is one of the darkest points of World War II. It was happening very much in secret, and the true horror of what the Holocaust was and its impact didn't truly come to light until the Germans were defeated in 1945. Now, for many in Germany, it's a very dark point in their history, as it is the world's history. And in these concentration camps, many children, families, were killed by the Nazis. They were just murdered. And sadly, Anne and her family were the victims of this. Now, after the war, her father, who was actually the only member of her family to survive, found Anne's diary and published it so she could become the world-famous writer she dreamed of. Now, Frank's life and diary has had an enormous impact on the world. Her very personal account of what life was like for Jews in Nazi-occupied Europe acts as almost a time capsule to what life was like for many millions of people killed by the Nazis during the Holocaust. Her diary has sold over 30 million copies and has been printed in over 70 languages. The Anne Frank story is something that you need to read. If you have the opportunity to get her book and read her book, please read her book. If you go onto the Anne Frank website, there's actually a fantastic video that kind of details everything about her life, and it's very, very good. They've even actually made a modern version, little vlog videos of what Anne might have filmed if she had a camera at the time. They're really, really good. Now, this brings us to our writing task for this week. For this creative writing task, I'm actually going to give you a choice. So you're going to use these websites. You've got the annefrank.org website, which again has the videos and it has vlogs and everything on there. You've got the annefrank.com, which has a lot of kind of facts and information on there. And you've got National Geographic for Kids, which isn't as good, but it actually does have some quite nice simple facts to read through. Now what I would like you to do using these websites as information is you have the choice of doing one of these. You can either create a fact file about Anne Frank's life with images, and that could be on PowerPoint or slides or on Canva, whatever you want to do. But I'm not looking for a list though. I do want you to actually spend some time, write the information down, put some images in there, make it look interesting. Okay, or you can create a graphic novel like a comic book, retelling her story with captions and speech bubbles. Now, when you hear comic book, I do not mean a little comic as in, haha, this is funny. I mean, you retell her story in a very interesting and visual way. And then you've got the option of doing a slideshow storybook, retelling a story with images you create or ones you find online. Now you can draw the images, you can do a bit where you can do it where you get an image and you actually draw over the top of the image, and so you kind of have like a cartoon version of a real image. And what I want you to do is then put that on each slide and then add a little bit of story to that. I'm leaving this task quite open for you to just be as creative as you want to be. However, please don't just copy and paste facts. Watch the videos, read the information, write it in your own words, make it as personal as you can. If you want to go and find the book or find other websites to use about Anne Frank, please do. It's one of those stories that I feel like all children need to read. Now, at the end of this slide, I've actually put a few tips of how you could actually complete a few of these tasks. So you've got fact file tips that I'll let you to read, you've got some slideshow storybooks and some graphic novel examples of how it's been done. Now, I want to reiterate that these websites are really good. You need to go on there, you need to use them. They are fantastic resources for you to actually create something here. Now, I am looking to be sent this piece of work, but please do a really good job of it. Okay, I'll see you in the next lesson. Goodbye.